Hi guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. So greatly appreciate it. Truly is. Before we get started, let me give you my usual disclaimer that this video is for educational purposes only. Please do not take what I say as fact. Please always do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Next, if you have not liked, subscribed, or commented yet, please consider doing so. It really helps me out and I really appreciate it. And with that, let's get started. Lucille Ball was born on August 6, 1911 to parents Henry Durrell Ball and Desiree Dee Hunt. She was born at her grandparents' apartment on Stewart Street in Jamestown, New York, and was delivered by her grandmother, Flora Bell Hunt. Shortly after she was born, her parents moved the family back to Montana and then moved again to Wyandotte, Michigan by the time she was 3 years old. While she was in Michigan, her father found a job as a foreman for a telephone line crew. And when Dee Dee was 5 months pregnant with Lucy's little brother, Fred, her father fell ill with grip, which is an old-fashioned term for influenza, which turned into typhoid fever, and he would die shortly after at the extremely young age of 28 years old. 3 years after Henry's death, Dee Dee remarried a man named Ed Peterson. On Dee Dee and Ed's wedding day, 7-year-old Lucille Ball looked up at him, thrilled to have a dad again, and asked, "Are you my new daddy?" To which Ed replied, "Call me Ed." Immediately after the wedding, Dee Dee and Ed moved to Detroit to look for jobs, leaving Freddie behind with Dee Dee's parents, and leaving Lucy behind with Ed's older, cheerless parents who were less than happy about the new arrangement they had just found themselves in. Lucille's punishments from her Peterson grandparents were often unreasonable in Lucille's opinion, especially since she was never given a clear example as to why she deserved the punishment in the first place. These punishments would include things like solitary confinement in her room or being sent to bed before the sun went down in the summer while being forced to listen to the neighborhood kids playing outside her window. She was made to do chores such as rolling the edges of lining towel by hand, darting the Peterson's hose, washing the dishes daily, and often being forced to rewash them. And although this domestic upbringing helped her out in life, it didn't come without an internal feeling of unworthiness and insecurity that would actually haunt her for years. When Dee Dee and Ed returned to Detroit, Dee Dee's father, Grandpa Hunt, decided to buy a home in the country so that they could all live together in the same house. February 1st, 1920, Fred and Flora Hunt purchased the family's new home on 8th Street in Celeron, New York for $2,000. You know how many homes I would have for $2,000? Shortly after moving in, Lucy's Aunt Lola gave birth to her daughter Cleo. Because Aunt Lola worked long hours at her beauty shop, Lucy often helped her grandmother raise Cleo as their own. Grandpa Hunt was a woodworker, and he would make her all types of things when she was growing up. Things such as sleds, wagons, wheelbarrows, stilts, pogo sticks, swings, teeter-totters, and tree houses, along with cherry and walnut wood doll furniture. There was an indoor bathroom and a toilet in the house, but for a long time they would have to bathe outside. And in the summertime, Lucy would have to take soap with her if she wanted to go down to the lake. This was so she could wash her hair and her body while she was there. Fun fact, true story. I have been obsessed with Lucille Ball literally since, I don't know, I was probably yay big. I love her. So last year, I ended up going to Jamestown, New York for like a weekend bit. And if you haven't gone and you love Lucille Ball, you need to go to this because it is amazing. There's a museum. You can go by the house. I went to her grave. Everything. I'll put pictures in for you. That I'll do. Grandma Hunt would fall ill with uterine cancer and would sadly lose her battle at the very young age of 51. After Grandma Hunt died, there were no adults in the home during the day. Mom Dee Dee would be working long hours selling hats, and Aunt Lola would be working long hours at her beauty shop. So at just 11 years old, Lucy found herself raising her 7-year-old brother Freddie and her 3-year-old cousin Cleo. Oh, before I move on again, I forgot to say this. You know that saying, like, art imitates life, imitates art? It wasn't until I really dove deep into her life that there's so many similarities with her life story that are portrayed on the Isle of Lucy show. It's unreal. It's uncanny. And I tried to put them together. Like I'm going to try to show you guys like the scenes from the show that imitate the scenes from her life. Just keep note of that. Especially if you really know her episodes, you're going to pick up on it easy. Actually, some of them, you don't even have to know all of her episodes to pick up on it. Lucy's adolescence was met with a red-hot temper and a short fuse. She would get into physical fights in the schoolyard, kicking, rolling, and biting. Not just girls, but a few boys as well. She was a badass, and I love her for that. One of her typing teachers made her so mad once that she actually threw a typewriter at her. She describes her temper in her memoir as, "It takes me a long time to get angry, but when I do, it's such a compilation of things over a long period of time that no one could understand what triggered it, not even myself." At age 13, Lucy got a job at an amusement park as a short order cook at a hamburger stand. At the age of 14, she fell in love for the first time with a 23-year-old Italian boy named Johnny DeVita. He was studying to be a doctor when they first met, and they would dance like nobody was watching, make each other laugh, talk about their dreams, the future, and their deepest secrets. At age 15, she was a dancer in the musical Scottish Rite Review. She danced so passionately that she fell into the orchestra pit and pulled an arm out of its socket. The Jamestown Post-Journal would hail her as a new discovery, and the head of the Jamestown Players told her she was chock full of talent, and that would be an understatement for her. That summer, Johnny's father was killed while coming out of 6 o'clock mass. Lucy says in her book that Johnny's ambition to be a doctor died with him that day. Johnny had to become the head of the house for his mother and sisters, and Lucy and Johnny grew apart because of this. Johnny would remain a love that haunted Lucille for a very long time. The following summer, Lucy was signed up by someone for a bathing beauty contest. At the time, she stood 5 foot 7 inches and weighed less than 100 pounds, with a bunch of freckles on her back. Dee Dee sent her to the best photographer in Jamestown, and he would later say that it was very difficult to get a good picture of Miss Ball because the woman was just not photogenic. Photographers said the same thing about Marilyn Monroe, and we all know how that turned out. Lucy was runner-up in that contest. Right after the beauty contest was over, Grandpa Fred came home with a real .22 caliber rifle for Lucy's little brother Freddie, who was about to turn 12. One day, Grandpa set up tin cans for Freddie to practice on. Freddie was shooting the tin can targets, and then he decided to let his girlfriend have a try. She picked up the rifle, she held it against her shoulder, she closed one eye, and she shot. It was at that moment that they heard Warner, the 8-year-old little boy that lived on the corner, screaming, "I've been shot." The bullet passed through his spine, severing it. And though he was blessed to survive, sadly, he would never walk again. That's awful. Warner's parents sued Grandpa Hunt for everything that he had, and after a lengthy trial, Grandpa Hunt was found guilty of negligence and ordered to pay $4,000, which was a lot of money back then. I mean, figured he bought that. I mean, figure he bought that house, that beautiful house, for $2,000. So it was a lot of money in 1928. Like now, that's equivalent to $69,304.33. Their house on 8th Street was put up for auction, and after the mortgage was paid off and legal fees were paid, Warner's family ended up with nothing. After this, Lucy and her family moved to a very tiny apartment on Wilcox Ave in Jamestown, New York. This move also forced Lucy to move to a new high school her junior year. The combination between all that had happened recently and Lucy hating her new school forced her to begin running away. She would take off to Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo, really anywhere. Dee Dee was beside herself at the way her daughter was acting, and thankfully she chose to guide her rather than to punish her. So one night after dinner, Dee Dee decided to ask Lucy how she felt about going to drama school. And with that, Lucy was off to her next adventure. She attended the John Murray Anderson Robert Milton Theater School in New York, mostly because the tuition was cheap. To save even more money, she lived with friends on Dyckman Street in Upper Manhattan. The school would soon discover that Lucille couldn't sing, couldn't dance, and couldn't control her voice or body properly. I think that's what we all love about her, right? At the end of the term, the school sent Dee Dee a letter letting her know that basically they did not believe that Lucille had what it took, and if they kept her in the school, she would be wasting her money. So rather than go back to Jamestown and face defeat, Lucy decided to join hundreds of girls at the Ziegfeld Follies Schubert spectacle that were needed to decorate the stage with fur and feathers and become a showgirl. She would very quickly learn that to survive in the theater, you have to be very strong, very healthy, and damn resilient. People will rarely give you an encouraging word and always ask the dreaded question, do you have any Broadway experience? One morning, Lucille woke up to find that the only money she had was 4 pennies, and at that time, it was a nickel to ride the subway. So Lucy did what any aspiring actress would do, and she panhandled for a penny. She would show up to Schubert Girl rehearsals and stay there until they swept her off the stage with cigarette butts. They wanted sultry sex, but all she put forth was her awkwardness. She was so shy and timid that if people spoke to her, the words would actually get stuck in her mouth while she was trying to answer. Which is crazy to picture her like that, right? Because she's so, like, that's just not the Lucille Ball that I think anybody knows. So it's crazy to even think about her like that. She would consistently rehearse for weeks and end up getting fired right before the dress fitting. She wore out her shoes going to different casting offices, and she would often hide behind coffee bars and wait for customers to leave just so that she could eat their leftover donuts and buy a coffee with the tips that they left. But she never gave up. Finally, she was picked for the chorus of a Fred and Paula Stone show called Stepping Stones. After 5 weeks of being on the show, the producer called her around midnight to let her know that they were changing the dance routines and that anyone that couldn't dance ballet was out of the show. They told Lucy that she was a great kid, but that she just didn't have what it takes, and suggested she go back to Montana and raise a big family. It was at this point that she decided to stop being a drag on Dee Dee and put her dreams on hold temporarily. After she decided that people don't think about her as much as she gives them credit for, and the truth of the matter was that nobody really gives a damn about her, she began to cure herself of her shyness. One morning, while looking through the classified ads, Lucy found and landed a job for $25 a week to model fur coats. Fellow coworker models took her under their wing and showed her the ropes. They would get her blind dates and teach her how to stretch the blind date dinner into 2. One model taught her that when the waiter wasn't looking, you put your napkins inside your bag and then you add several buttered rolls, celery, olives, and a big slice of roast beef. I mean, hey, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? From time to time, when the homesick feeling became too much to bear, Lucy would pack up and she would go home for a while. While back at home, she would work as a clerk at a dress shop and as a soda jerk at Walgreens that was across the street from the Jamestown Hotel. At this time, Grandpa Hunt was living with relatives at Mayville City. One of the conditions that was given to him by the judge was that he was not allowed to leave Mayville, and because he lost his home as a result of the charges, he had no choice but to live with these relatives. One day, towards the end of his year-long sentence, Lucy heard that Grandpa Hunt was depressed and that the relatives he was staying with were not treating him well. They would only allow him to have strawberries to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's it, strawberries. This infuriated Lucy worse than anything else that she had been through in her past. Her best friend, Marion Strong, witnessed her throw plates and pillows, stomp her feet, scream and weep, saying, "I'll make it up to Daddy some way. I'll show them, you'll see." She had no idea how she was going to do this, but she did know that she wasn't going to get there by being a soda jerk. So, back to New York she went. Once there, she was lucky enough to land a job as a model at Hattie Carnegie's internationally famous dress shop. And practically overnight, she found herself amongst rich society women, glamorous movie stars, and free-spending men about town. While Lucy was working as a model, she began traveling, meeting rich, eligible bachelors, dancing till dawn, and going to an endless number of Broadway openings. In the spring of 1930, Bill Bemis, a professional Broadway actor, was asked by the Jamestown Players to produce and direct a fast-paced melodrama called Within the Law. Bill had seen Lucille in various productions around town and was so impressed by her work that he asked her to play the role of Aggie Lynch, a hard-boiled, confident woman who blackmails married men. The Jamestown Journal raved about her work as Aggie, calling her sensational, and Bill Bemis told her that she was better than the original Aggie. Lucy began to feel uncomfortable working at Hattie's, so she found a job modeling at a first-class clothing house that was owned by a wonderful couple named Jackson. She loved working for the Jacksons. She speaks very highly about them in her book. They were wonderful people, and they would treat their models like their own daughters. So much so that Mr. Jackson would even let her borrow a dress for a date night, just as long as she brought it back to him the following morning. Lucy was the bride that would end every single fashion show. So one night, a movie scout saw her at a silk ball and phoned her the following morning while she was at work to suggest a movie test. Because this was the Jacksons' busiest season, and because she had so much respect for them, like she truly loved them and she truly respected them, she thanked him very much, but she let him know that she couldn't possibly take off from work. All the buyers were in town, and they were showing their new line, and the outfits were made just for her. Mr. Jackson overheard her whole conversation, and after she got off the phone, he made her call them back. Lucy told him that Paramount wanted her to test every day next week, and his reply was, "Wonderful. That's much more important than modeling a few clothes. Tell them you'll go." That's the kind of guy he was. Sadly, nothing came of those test shoots, but at least she was able to continue to work for the Jacksons. So as a way to earn extra money at night and on the weekends, she would often pose for commercial illustrators. A freelance painter named Ratter did an oil portrait of her in a flowing chiffon dress. He later added 2 gray Russian wolfhounds and sold the portrait to Chesterfield Cigarettes. Overnight, Lucille's face was all over billboards around town. The Jacksons' wholesale warehouse was at 39th and 7th. And on her lunch breaks, Lucy would walk the few blocks that it took to get to Times Square just so she could gaze at photographs in the hotel lobby. Then one day in July, while Lucy was strolling the streets of Times Square, she heard a voice call out, "Lucille Ball, just the person I was looking for. How would you like to go to Hollywood?" She turned around and she saw Sylvia Halo. "You're the latest Chesterfield girl, aren't you?" She goes on to tell Lucy that a dozen well-known poster girls are needed for a new movie called Roman Scandals, and that they are scheduled to leave for Hollywood in 3 days. Of course, Lucy jumps at this, right? And Sylvia tells her to go down to the Palace Theater, and so Lucy goes down. They love her, and they sign her right there on the spot. Of course they did, right? She was paid $125 a week for 6 weeks, plus transportation, and 3 days later, she was off to Hollywood. It all happened so fast that Lucy didn't even realize that she had just landed her first big break. In 1933, Hollywood was filled with men about town and producers chasing would-be starlets. Lucy was one of the few girls to arrive in Hollywood with a contract already. As she drove from Pasadena to Hollywood, she just sat back in the limo and took it all in. She was brought to the Roosevelt Hotel for her first press conference. After this, she met with Sam Goldwyn and other movie executives who asked the girls where they wanted to live. Lucy decided on a one-room Murphy bed apartment about 3 blocks from where the movie was being filmed. The following morning at the studio, all the girls were given skimpy bathing suits and told to line up. 111-pound Lucille Ball would stuff gloves, paper, or even banana peels. I could just picture her doing this. Would stuff gloves, paper, or even banana peels into her suit just for fun. Once, when Lucy was still working for Hattie Carnegie, she went to the Belmont racetrack. She remembered sitting behind Dorothy Gish and her little sister. After a little while, Dorothy began tearing off pieces of the program and sticking them to her face to look like measles. And Lucy thought this was the funniest thing ever. Back at the studio, the Goldwyn girls would line up so that Eddie Cantor could give them one more look over. And as he began walking down the line, Lucy was tearing little red pieces of paper, wetting them with her tongue, and sticking them to her face, sticking them all over her body. When Mr. Cantor got to her, his mouth dropped, his eyes popped, and he began to laugh hysterically. He asked her name and then told everyone that she was a riot. Roman Scandals was one of the biggest musical extravaganzas in 1933. Filming for the movie was supposed to last 6 weeks, but it actually ended up stretching into 6 months. And Lucy loved everything about movie making. The money, meeting so many people, the high excitement each day, and the talent of the technicians who put the Coliseum on a 30-foot stage. Her movie career actually would have ended there had it not been for another stroke of just good luck. One day, Russell Market came onto the set and called out, "Hello, Lucille." He reminded her that they had met previously in New York. He went on to tell her that he was going to be the choreographer for a big film called Moulin Rouge, and he was at the set of Roman Scandals to see if he could pick up some showgirls for the film. Russell told her that he could teach her what was required, but just as Roman Scandals was finished, the girls were loaned out to 20th Century Fox. After this was over, Lucy got brief walk-on parts in rapid succession, including Murder at the Vanities, Bottoms Up, and Affairs of Selene. While making a Goldwyn picture, Lucy came down with a bad cough and a high fever. She swagged some cough medicine, unaware of the codeine content, and she ended up having to creep into a quiet spot and stay there for hours before anyone found her. After this, she got showgirl parts in the shows Nana and the Bowery. Producers kept telling her that she should be in comedy, mainly because she was fine with taking on the roles that other starlets didn't want to. She never whined about the siphoned water or the pies in the face. She was just happy to be learning the business. And I'm guessing that that's why she is an icon and will forever be an icon. After her brother Freddie graduated from high school, he moved out to Hollywood, got a job at a supper club, and he and Lucille rented a small furnished bungalow on Ogden Drive in Hollywood. They spent every free moment fixing it up in anticipation for Dee Dee and Grandpa Hunt to come and live with them. After the bungalow was done, Lucy and Freddie called Dee Dee and told her to come out to Hollywood. Shortly after hanging up the phone with Dee Dee, she got a call from Columbia, and they let her know that they were giving up her stock company and that they had all been laid off forever. Bummer. She had a date that night with a wonderful man named Dick Green, who was the brother of famous songwriter Johnny Green. While on the date, and seemingly out of nowhere, Lucy just blurts out, "Well, I lost my job. How do you like that?" To which Dick simply replied, there's a showgirl call at RKO at 9 o'clock. He goes on to ask her if she ever modeled at Bergdorf Goodman's in New York. Lucy told him that she hadn't, so Dick advised her to just pretend that she had. At the interview, Mr. Newman asked her if she had ever worked for Bergdorf Goodman. And Lucy replied, yes, and spit out a bunch of phony dates. So Mr. Newman says, really? That's very interesting because I was there that whole time and I've never laid eyes on you. But you've got the job. Which is pretty cool, right? You just lied to my face, but you got the job anyway. Lucy had just landed her second big break, fibbing her way into the role of Roberta that led her into a 3-month contract that stretched into 7 years. Her next movie was Follow the Fleet, which was another big flashy musical with Betty Grable and was based on the stage comedy Short Leaves. The picture opened at Radio City in February of 1936, and shortly after that, Lucy received her first piece of fan mail. It was addressed to the front office, and it read, "You might give the tall, gum-chewing blonde more parts and see if she can't make the grade A good gamble." From Follow the Fleet, Lucy went into her second lead in That Girl from Paris. Lucy fooled around a lot on the set, and one day an older man came up to her and said, "Young lady, if you play your cards right, you could be one of the greatest comedians in the business." And he was right, and she was. Lucy just gave him a look, figuring he was one of those guys who went around measuring starlets for type, but later learned that it was Edward Sedgwick, a famous comedy director that would eventually teach Lucy many comedy techniques like the double take and eye-rolling bit and how to handle props. He would also become Desi's mentor, and his wife Emma would become Lucy's confidant. They were as close as a mother and father to them. After That Girl from Paris ended, Lucy was asked to do a small part in the play Hey Diddle Diddle that was headed for Broadway. While in New York, Lucy moved into a swanky 57th Street hotel. Once her role in New York ended, she went back to Hollywood to play a part in Breakfast with Venora. She then landed a speaking role in the movie Stage Door. This would be her first standout part, and afterwards, the producer's wife was overheard saying, "Who was that funny tall girl in Stage Door who went home to Oregon to marry her lover man?" Her next role was another expensive A-list movie called Having a Wonderful Time. The movie was a hit at Radio City, and Lucy was mentioned in the New York movie reviews for the first time, calling her faultless as Miriam, one of the harpies. She was well known in RKO Studios as the starlet who never complained. There was an important producer there that she really liked and respected. He was married with 2 children, and then seemingly out of nowhere, the producer professed his love to her. Awkward. He let her know that he was ready to divorce his wife, leave his children, and go against his religion and conscience to marry her. Lucy wanted more than that. She wanted a relationship that mirrored Grandma Flora Bell and Grandpa Hunt's relationship. She truly liked this producer and his work, but wouldn't fall in love with him because of his wife and his children. She's morals, basically. Friends would actually encourage her to marry him because he could, quote, make her career. But in the end, she found the courage to turn him down. And this decision would put into motion a lot of unforeseen consequences. The producer suffered from a bad case of broken pride and began to lose all interest in Lucy's career. But even worse, his wife found out about this, and with the help of some family members at RKO, she vowed that Lucille Ball would never land a role in an A-list movie at RKO Pictures again. Meanwhile, maybe you should have been talking to your husband. I'm just saying. So at that point, her career at RKO pretty much ended, and she never regretted it. After the debacle at RKO, Lucy decided to give Hollywood a rest and try her hand at radio. This would end up being the best decisions that she had ever made. In early 1938, she appeared on a weekly radio program called The Radio Show. Clever, right? Sorry. This led to a future spot on Phil Baker's Hollywood radio show and gave her name in the trade. She was able to flip a comedy line, which a lot of actresses couldn't do. And you can't depend on props, makeup, or costumes while on the radio, so you have to rely on timing and tone of voice for comic effect. This was invaluable training for her, and her work in radio put a new zip into her acting. She was cast in the Affair of Annabelle series, The Affair of Annabelle. This did so well at the box office that they made Annabelle Takes a Tour. She also did a few musicals for some time, and her $50 a week rose to $1,000 a week. During this time, she began dating director Al Hall, who was 20 years her senior. Al was previously married to Lola Lane and was in no rush to marry again. This didn't bother Lucy much because she just enjoyed his company, advice, and guidance, and she wasn't in love with him. So, I guess she didn't care. This relationship lasted for 2 years until in Lucy's words, a Cuban skyrocket burst over my horizon. Oh, today's a joke. In 1939, Lucy was financially successful enough to buy her first fur coat and to hire her first personal assistant, a woman named Harriet Mccain. She had first heard about Harriet when she was being interviewed on a radio program. She never asked her for any of her references, and 5 minutes into the interview, she asked her what size uniform she wore. That's how much she loved her. Harriet was by Lucy's side for years throughout the United States and Europe on air, sea, and land. In the spring of 1939, she was offered a small dramatic part in the movie Five Came Back. This role was originally intended for a different actress that was unable to do it, and up until this point, Lucy had only done comedy. Five Came Back would end up being a huge hit, and this would be the role that would give Lucy's career the boost it so desperately needed. And soon she was told that she was being groomed for A-list movies. In December of that year, she was sent east to do appearances, and the studio told her to go see the movie Too Many Girls because they had just bought the rights to it and she may get a role in it. While in New York, studio press agents asked Lucy to take a picture and she fell on the ice rink in Rockefeller Center. She would spend the next 10 days in the hospital because of this fall. While in the hospital, she learned from friends that came to visit her that Too Many Girls was a huge hit with fast-paced and funny combined. The plot of the movie was not much, though. It was about a beautiful rich girl who decides to go to college and take 4 football heroes with her who are really bodyguards in disguise. Seems fast. Sounds boring. Desi Arnaz was cast as the South American football wonder who sang with a heavy Spanish accent, danced a way out conga, banged a bongo, and strummed a guitar. He was seen as the Elvis Presley of that time with the way that girls would react to him. Offstage, he was dating film stars, stage stars, and all the leading debutantes, including the beautiful Brenda Frazier. After Lucy got out of the hospital, she was taken to see the movie Too Many Girls. And while she's there, she could not take her eyes off of Desi Arnaz. She recognized in him the kind of electrifying charm that could never be faked. Star quality. Once Desi opened his mouth and began speaking his own brand of English, Lucy began laughing uncontrollably. Beautiful and funny. What a combination. After the movie, Lucy went to the conga where Desi would sing and demonstrate conga, but unfortunately he was not working that night, of course. So she wouldn't get to meet him. I don't know how it always happens. I'm just saying. Shit like that always happens. A few days later, she returned to Hollywood and the studio gave her a role in the film Dance Girl Dance. Lucy got the role as a strip teaser, and on the first day of filming, Lucy finally got to meet Desi at the RKO lot. She was wearing a slinky gold dress with a slit up to her thigh. George Abbott, who was lunching at the studio with the cast of Too Many Girls, called Lucy over, and this is where she finally met Desi Arnaz for the first time. With Desi saying, "What a hunk of a woman." That's terrible. That's a terrible line. Don't ever use that line. That's a terrible line. After filming for the day had wrapped, Desi asked Lucy out to dinner, and the rest is history, basically. They went to a nightclub, sat at a small table, and talked all night. She fell in love with Desi within minutes, and she said the only thing better than talking to him was looking at him. Desi Arnaz was an only child who grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. His family owned cattle ranches and townhouses in Cuba. His father was a doctor of pharmacology and the mayor of Santiago for 10 years. His mother, Dolores, was a famous beauty and one of the heirs to the Bacardi rum fortune. At just 16 years old, Desi had his own speedboat, motor car, and 3 different homes. Desi loved his life. I can't imagine why. Then came one of those revolutions that frequently erupted in Cuba. And his father was 600 miles away in Havana. His mother ran through the house, grabbing the cash and the pet chihuahua. His cousin would arrive just in time to rush them to safety before their house went up in flames. Desi and his mother went into hiding at an aunt's house for 6 months. His father, along with the rest of the Cuban Senate, was locked up in the Morro Castle fortress. They lost everything, and when his father was finally released, he decided to go to Miami, Florida, and start over. First Desi, and then the rest of the family would meet him later. Desi was 17, penniless, and did not speak a word of English when he arrived in Miami. He found his father in a dingy rooming house cooking canned beans on a hot plate, and even that was too expensive for him. That's how poor he was. That's bad. That's bad. So they moved into an unheated warehouse that was infested with rats. And even though Desi was still a kid and didn't speak English, he went out to look for a job. He cleaned canary cages at a pet store, drove a banana truck, and eventually graduated from St. Patrick's High School in Miami with A's in English and American history. So he wasn't a stupid man. In 1936, when Desi was just 19, he heard that a big rumba band needed a guitarist. So he borrowed a suit and shakily went up and sang what would later become his signature song, Babaloo. When he was done singing, the applause almost knocked him over and he began to cry. Then he looked up and he saw a bunch of his classmates from St. Patrick's High and he began to cry harder. There's no way that he could have known that Desi and Babalu would become as well known as Judy Garland and Over the Rainbow. That's crazy, right? One night while Desi was at the plaza, Xavier Cugat caught his act and gave him a job as a traveling singer. Because he was not being paid what he knew he was worth, he quit the band and went back to Miami to start a band of his own. Unfortunately, this did not work out as planned, and Desi soon learned that if you want to start out on your own, you have to throw out your chest and sell yourself. Desi was down to his last $10, and a gambler at heart, he filled his pockets with Cugat press copies and strutted into Mother Kelly's. He ordered filet mignon, champagne, Cherry's Jubilee, and a $2 Havana cigar. When the manager stopped by the table, Desi whipped out the clipper, and before the evening was over, the manager hired him to organize a band for a new club that he was opening. He was sent some musicians, but none of them played Latin music. Imagine that. You have to start a Latin band and none of your musicians sing Latin music or play Latin music. In 1938, a New York agent spotted Desi, and the next thing he knew, he was the headliner in a New York nightclub called La Conga. After just 4 months at La Conga, he was offered the part in Too Many Girls. The show opened in Boston, and overnight he was a sensation. Everyone knew that Lucy was starry-eyed over Desi, and he would keep showing up to her house on Ogden Drive. People warned her to stay away from him, but Lucy did not care. And I'm guessing her friends either knew or sensed that he had issues with monogamy. In September of 1940, after Too Many Girls wrapped, Desi's 6-month option was picked up. This contract would allow him 6 months on the road and 6 months in Hollywood. He had 3 movies lined up at the time, and while they were being written, Desi went out to Chicago for the cast opening of Too Many Girls. Lucy followed a few days later. The press snapped a picture of them together, and in the picture, Desi was gazing into a champagne glass and Lucy was gazing at him. They captioned the picture, "She eyes Arnez." A friend of Desi's came over to their table that night to let them know that he had hit the jackpot, to which Desi replied, "I doubt it, but the best thing that happened to me this year was meeting Lucy." Oh. They were criticized for kissing and hugging in public so much, but by then they were so in love that they didn't care. October 15th, 1940. Lucy had returned to Hollywood to film a movie, and Desi sent his first of thousands of telegrams reading, "Baby, I'll see you tomorrow. I'll wire definite time of arrival. Love, Desi." After Too Many Girls ended, Desi signed a headliner with a traveling band, during which Lucy began shooting a movie called A Guy, a Girl, and a Gob. She played a poor working girl with a screwball family. Desi was still sending her telegrams. "Darling, I'm in Knoxville." And, "Darling, things look swell. I miss you so very much. I'm awfully sorry if I was mean the other night, but I love you so very much. I guess I just lost my head. It was wonderful talking to you tonight, but awful when I had to hang up and was left all alone. I'm getting a release from the show and hope to be able to see Palm Springs." They saw each other briefly, and Desi signed for an important appearance at Versailles nightclub in New York. Then another telegram shows up. "Sweetheart, it is wonderful to know exactly what one wants. These past few weeks away from you have been lonely, sad, and painful. It showed me that I want you and you always." A few days later, he sent another telegram. "I'm so glad you called, darling. Even if things look bad to you from so far away, please don't make quick conclusions. I really miss you immensely, and I'm so anxious for you to come to town. Please trust me a little bit. I love you very much." Desi was described as a romantic. He loved life and he never worried about tomorrow. Lucy was more level-headed, didn't live beyond her means, or went overboard with drinking, gambling, but was emotional and sentimental. And even though they were from different worlds, they both longed for home and a family. Desi was a very jealous person, Fearful of losing her, he told Lucy that he made plans for them to elope in Greenwich, Connecticut. On the drive up there, Desi was singing. His voice was radiant and his hands were shaking. After they arrived in Greenwich, they went to see a judge and asked him to waive the 5-day waiting period. Desi had planned to marry Lucy as Justice of the Peace, but at the last moment, it was the Justice of the Peace that decided that they needed a more romantic spot than his office. So he drove them into the country to the Byron River Beagle Club. Lucy and Desi couldn't be happier. They just kept kissing each other and their marriage certificate. It was at that moment that Lucy was willing to do whatever it took to make this marriage work. This blissfully happy and intimate moment didn't last very long, though, because reporters had gotten news of the elopement and rushed the doors of the Beagle Club. Desi phoned the manager of the Roxy, who informed him that he was on stage in 5 minutes, so they rushed back to New York. And while on the ride back, they heard an announcement of their elopement on the radio. Nosy people. Jeez. After they arrived at the Roxy, Ricky carried Lucy over the threshold of his dressing room. They decided to start married life at the pier. Desi would be delighted to find Lucy settled in after he finished his show at the Roxy. But instead he was furious, yelling at her that he refused to have a wife that rode around town in a taxi. Not surprisingly, Lucy clapped back, because remember, she has a fiery temper, saying, "She's sure possessive as hell all of a sudden." Then, in Lucille's words, they glared at each other and fell helplessly into each other's arms, which was the way most of their arguments would end for many years to come. Friends gave their marriage 6 months, while Lucy gave it 1 week. On their wedding night, Desi woke Lucy up from sleep, shaking her so ferociously that she thought the hotel was on fire. And when she woke up and asked him what was wrong, he told her that he was thirsty and to get him a drink. Jumps out of bed and she begins filling his cup with water, and then she comes to realization that he's perfectly capable of getting his own damn water. But she loved him. Desi wanted a wife that was willing to play second fiddle to him, and she was okay with that. She hoped that his good taste, intelligence, and sex appeal would carry his career. Unfortunately, due to his heavy accent, the number of gigs that he could get was very limited. They stayed in New York for 6 weeks while Desi finished out his contract at the Roxy. Lucy was called back to Hollywood for retakes of A Girl, a Guy, and a Gob. And after about 6 months of marriage, Lucy and Desi realized how hard it is to make a marriage work in Hollywood. So they found a ranch-style home in the San Fernando Valley. They purchased it for $16,900. Lucy's idea of womanhood was always the pioneer woman who worked at her husband's side and bore his children. Desi's idea of family was based on his childhood in Cuba. His father was very wealthy, owned 3 ranches, townhouses, and an island on Santiago Bay, a racing stable, cars, and speedboats. The first thing they did when they bought the house was rent a bulldozer, dig a hole, and build a swimming pool. Then Desi planted groves of lemon and orange trees. They were so in love. All their jewelry was engraved. Desi wore a St. Christopher charm around his neck that was engraved with Darling. They christened everything in sight: the ranch, the car, and Desi's first boat. Because Lucy was a saver and Desi was a spender, they had a business manager right from the start of their marriage. He handles all of their affairs and paid Lucy's expenses while Desi paid his own. And then each week they would contribute a fixed amount to home expenses. Whatever. One night after they were married, Desi and Lucy have a blowout fight, okay? So, she gets out of bed at dawn. She goes outside the ranch house where their brand new station wagon was. She takes a hammer and she walks around the car, smashing all the windows. I love it. I love it. Lucy's biggest complaint with their marriage was that he only worked on their marriage in spurts, and it seemed to her that he never intended to be a good or faithful husband. Desi's biggest complaint with Lucy was that she was too jealous. But, I mean, if you didn't lie and cheat, then she wouldn't have to be such a jealous person. I'm just saying. Even though their arguments raged on and on, they were still deeply in love. And with the help of Grandpa Fred, Desi built a rumpus room at the ranch. Okay. He explained to a reporter that every time they would fight, Desi would have to pack his stuff, go to a Hollywood hotel, unpack, have someone steam his clothes. Then he would make up with Lucy, repack, go home, unpack, and have his clothes steamed again. Repeated times of this became very expensive, and Desi knew it would be much cheaper for him to build a room himself, giving it a main room, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a closet to transfer his clothes back and forth from the rumpus room to the ranch house. Maybe just don't cheat and don't lie, and then you won't have to get in huge fights constantly, and build a rumpus room. This defies logic. I'm sorry, I'm just saying, this defies logic. Don't lie, don't cheat, come the hell home. Then you won't have to build a room. More than anything else, Lucy and Desi wanted to star in a movie together, but they couldn't persuade the heads of the studios to give them a chance. They didn't think people would believe that Desi was Lucy's husband, even though Desi was Lucy's husband. He suggested they do a vaudeville act together with the theory that if it goes over well in New York and Chicago, then Hollywood would have to pick it up. They opened at the Roxy, playing 4 to 5 shows a day. They then moved to Brooklyn and Newark. Desi played bongo drums, and Lucy traded her pageant look for baggy pants and a derby hat. Not long after that, they had an offer with the Palladium in London. They got this offer twice and had to turn it down twice for the best reason. Lucy was pregnant. Sadly, Lucy lost that baby in the 3rd trimester, and she was sick over the loss. But she was confident that things would work out the next time. But as the months and then the years passed, there was never a next time. Lucy thought it might divert her to get a few farm animals at the ranch. She brought home 300 baby chicks that she would put in the den at night to keep warm, and a calf that they raised into a big, passionate cow. Sadly, all the chicks died of natural causes, and the cow roared his head through a window, costing them $1,000 to fix. To add insult to injury, her career was at a standstill. Then one day, she was offered a role as Her Highness, the crippled showgirl in the movie The Big Street. This would prove to be the biggest movie of her career. The movie got rave reviews with the New York Herald Tribune, saying Lucille Ball gives one of the best shows of her career, and Life magazine calling her acting superb. Because of the things that transpired with the producer and the wife at RKO, Lucy knew that her career was going nowhere fast with that studio. In 1942, her friend became president of the studio. He called her into his office one day to let her know that she was right to believe that her career was going to be going nowhere at that studio, but went on to tell her that ever since her role in Big Street, Metro and Paramount have been asking about her, and he wanted to know which studio she wanted him to share the contract with. Lucy chose MGM because they were top in musicals at the time. Her first movie at MGM was called Dewberry Was a Lady. She was a nightclub star who was admired by a nightclub attendant. At this time, Desi was filming a movie called Baton, a drama in which 13 soldiers are picked off one by the Japanese in the jungle. After this movie wrapped, Desi's only movie roles were limited to special musical appearances. After Dewberry was finished, Lucy went right into Best Foot Forward, the story of a fading movie star who was invited to a prep school prom. In 1943, Lucy made the movie Meet the People, where she played a famous actress who becomes a welder in a factory. In January of 1944, Grandpa Freddie passed away, and after returning from his funeral, Lucy did a very small part in the movie Ziegfeld Farms, which got terrible reviews. But Lucy was able to bounce back quickly after this, playing a part in Without Love, a movie where a young widow wants to keep the bright memory of a perfect marriage and a love-weary scientist that is marriage shy. While Lucy was busting her ass making money, her marriage was crumbling. Desi's nightlife had Hollywood talking, and Confidential magazine even published an article about his Palm Springs weekend. During the summer of 1944, Desi just stopped coming home. Again, if you came home, you wouldn't have to build a rumpus room. Lucy would lay in bed at night wondering where she had gone wrong. And even though she loved Desi more than anything, he was the only man in her life at the time, she decided to take drastic measures and divorce him. But did she really? Because she chose a California divorce because it takes a year of separation before the proceedings will begin. So this would give her 365 days to fix her marriage. So even though she was taking these drastic measures, she never wanted to do this. This is what I mean. He just did her dirty. She loved him, and he did her dirty. The night before she was scheduled to make her appearance in court, Desi showed up to the house being his charming self. The next morning, Lucy crawled out of bed, put on a suit, a hat, and jewelry. When Desi asked her where she was going, she told him to the court to divorce you. She told the judge that Desi had caused her grievous suffering. When she returned home that day, Desi was there, pale white and stricken. He told her that the next time he marries, he's going to be a better husband. Lucy told him the same, and Desi suggested that they try it on each other. Smooth. Even though she knew that Desi would never actually change, she decided to give it a chance. And he did change for a period of time, which they always do. They always change for a period of time, right? He came home every single night, and they both put a lot of work into their marriage. She knew that she would never be as happy as she was at the beginning of their marriage, but she was able to find peace with that. She began to put blinders onto the things that were too painful for her. She tried to view her worries and fears less seriously and curb her temper. She knew that things said out of anger were rarely true, but that they could never be taken back. During this time, a reporter asked Desi what he was doing to improve his marriage. To which he replied, "Well, I try to sleep with the damn windows open because Lucy likes fresh air, and I took square dancing for a while, dancing around with all those goofballs." This is what I mean. At this time, Lucy was asked to be in the picture Ready to Wed, which would become one of the highlights of her career. The movie was about a rich showgirl that sues a newspaper for writing an article about her that was full of lies. Her next role was in a movie called Two Smart People, which was a flop. The New York Times called it a dog-eared tale about love and confidence racket. The movie suffers from a lack of competent direction. Ouch. After this, not much was happening in Lucy or Desi's careers. So Desi asked MGM to release him from his contract so he could start a Roomba band. And even though Lucy was making $3,500 a week at the time, her career was going nowhere. She was still childless, and her dreams of her and Desi working side by side seemed hopeless. Lucy's agent had very little regard for her, and when the chips were down, he could care less about her career. This was also the agent that was handling all of her affairs. She tried to have a talk with him about what she could do to further her career, but he couldn't care less. He could care less. He did not even want to have a conversation with her. So Lucy's next movie was The Dark Corner. Everything in her personal life was going wrong at this time. While instead of The Dark Corner, after Lucy began messing up her lines, the producers accused her of drinking on the job. Lucy had never been in trouble at work, and she began to cry uncontrollably. Co-workers were so alarmed that they called her mother and her doctor. She never forgot that moment, and she says that it changed her for the better. She became more sensitive to people's feelings, and she always took the stance that you never know what someone is going through in their personal life and how it could be affecting their work performance. Yep. True. So true. She was skilled enough in her career at this point, though, to turn in a good performance. And even though she was dying inside, the dark corner was hailed as tough, fiber, exciting entertainment. Lucy knew that she needed a better agent, but the only way to legally fire her current agent was to quit MGM, so that's what she did. Then in the spring of 1946, Desi's band opened to rave reviews at zeros. His next gig was at the Copacabana in New York. This was the first time in 11 years that Lucy wasn't under contract, so she took 6 months off, boarded a train to New York with Desi and his band members. Desi got pretty busy after this, and he made the movie Cuban Pete for Universal. He was the musical director for Bob Hope's radio show, and the rest of the time he was touring the U.S. and Canada. In 1949, Lucy and Desi instituted a stay-at-home policy. Lucy was still childless and heartbroken over it. Desi decided to give up the rest of his tour so that they could both consult doctors as to why they didn't have a child yet. Lucy also took lessons in the Catholic faith at this time. She feared that because they were married by a judge, that their marriage somehow lacked a certain sacred quality. I don't believe that. But I guess she was so desperate at that time, like she would have done anything. So I respect that. So they married again in 1949 in Our Lady of the Valley Church. Desi wore a white suit and Lucy wore a blue satin dress. Her comedy mentor, Ed Sedgwick, gave her away, and Desi's mother, Dolores, was matron of honor. After the wedding, Lucy signed a contract with Columbia Pictures for one movie a year. Desi did a movie for them that same year called Holiday in Havana, and was still Bob Hope's musical director on his radio show. That year, Lucy did a video with Bob Hope called Sorrowful Joan. She also made Miss Grand Takes Richmond with Bill Holden, and a second movie with Bob Hope called Fancy Pants. In the spring of 1950, Lucy and Desi decided that if no one wanted to believe in them, then they would do it themselves. And with that, Desilu Productions was born. First order of business was to find out how the public reacted to them working together. So they did a Mr. and Mrs. Vaudeville act, where Desi sang and played the bongo drums, and Lucy kept trying to get into his act. She also did a baggy pants routine with a cello loaded with a stool, a plunger, flowers, and other props. The act was truly a mixed bag of all of their talents, and the audience loved them, and they began doing shows all over. Next stop, Chicago. Lucy and Desi rehearsed all day, and when they returned to their hotel room, they realized they'd been robbed. All of their jewelry and belongings, including a 40-carat, oh my God, a 40-carat, how big must that be? A 40-carat aquamarine engagement ring that Desi had given her. Before they knew it, the room was swarming with police officers, and Lucy was in the bathroom vomiting from an upset stomach. But this upset stomach would last for weeks, and then it occurred to her that she may be pregnant. So she immediately made arrangements to go see a doctor to get a pregnancy test at a lab. And she used her hairdresser's name, obviously, for privacy reasons. Okay, the following evening. That's crazy. The following evening, while in Desi's dressing room at the Roxy, Lucy hears on the radio, after 10 childless years, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz are expecting. And that is how she found out that she was going to have a baby. So she worked for a few more weeks, and then she canceled the rest of her bookings. 3 months into her pregnancy, she loses the baby. Doctors kept her in the hospital for a week on sedatives following the miscarriage. She's broken. But the doctors assured her that she still had a really good chance of becoming a mom. Because she was still contractually obligated to give Columbia Pictures one movie a year, 5 months after her miscarriage, she started filming Magic Carpet, where she played a temptress whose lips and temper were hotter than the desert. During the filming of this movie, Lucy found out that she was pregnant again. She refused to let anything get in the way of having this baby. So after she finished Magic Carpet, she canceled everything except her radio show. She sat home and she knitted while waiting for her baby. When Lucy was 4 months into her pregnancy, CBS gave Desi the green light to shoot a pilot for a television show starring him and Lucy's marriage that would air in the fall. Lucy's agent told her that she had 1 month to put a show together, and they wanted a pilot by February 15th. For 10 years, Lucy and Desi longed to be parents and to work together. Now that all of their dreams were coming true, they felt very unprepared. At that time, television was regarded as the enemy by Hollywood. So much so that movie stars were terrified to even make appearances on a television show because if it was a flop, they may never work in the movies again. Living out their dream would mean giving up everything else, including their radio programs. It was an all or nothing gamble. She called her agent and told him that they were going to do it, saying that her and Desi want to work together more than anything in this world. And spoiler alert, they made a fantastic decision. Lucy and Desi called their writers, and together they dreamed up the perfect set and characters. They were originally Lucy and Larry Lopez, and it wasn't until they started filming that they became the Ricardos. Desi would play a Cuban band leader that lived in New York, and Lucy would play a housewife with burning stage ambition. Because time was so limited, they adopted parts from their vaudeville act. Lucy did a baggy pants bit with a cello, and for the rest of the show, she wore pajamas and a bathrobe. This was a great way for her to hide her pregnancy, so it worked out perfectly. Desi sang, played the drum, and exchanged patter with her. They were a perfect pair, and they were loved by America then and now. Truly. A week later, they received a phone call that Philip Morris wanted to sponsor them. But the sponsor not only demanded that it be a weekly show, but he also demanded that it be taped live in New York. Lucy and Desi were not willing to up and move to New York. So after some negotiating, Desi made an offer to CBS for a $1,000 weekly salary cut to be given complete ownership of the show. CBS agreed to advance the enormous sum of money needed to start the film production with Desi as the producer. And up until this point, the only thing Desi ever managed was a 16-piece Latin band. Now he had to rent a studio and equipment, as well as find actors, cameramen, stagehands, writers, editors, scripts, for 39 weekly shows. When the deal was finally set, it was late March, and they had to start filming by August 15th to be on the air by October. Filming the half-hour shows was not a big deal. They could do that in a week. It was the editing that could take up to 5 weeks to be done. So they decided to hire 3 of the producers that Lucy worked with on her radio show to help them out. Okay. Lucy Ricardo was impulsive, inquisitive, and very feminine. Her nutty predicaments arose from a need to please. That's when Desi chimed in and said she can't sing or dance. She's earnest and pathetic. To which Ball replied, "Oh, I love that, Lucy." And that is how the title of the show came to be. Desi was cast as the level-headed member of the family. He was good with money, which is actually the complete opposite of him in real life, and dealt with his wife's antics but could only be pushed so far. They needed the audience to believe that Lucy was afraid of Ricky. There was also a strong chemistry between them that came through. True. Very true. The writers suggested that they add an older couple in a lower income bracket so that they could pit the couples against each other. Lucy had known William Frawley since her days at RKO, and he was an amazing comic. So him being Fred Mertz was a no-brainer, right? But at the time, he had a very bad drinking problem. So Desi told him that if he missed any work or came into work under the influence, he's fired immediately. That's it. So he agrees to this, and he also puts a clause into his contract that, okay, William Farley was best friends with Joe DiMaggio. So he put into his contract that if the Yankees go to the World Series, that he has to be given off so that he can go and attend the games. And Jesse agreed to it. They considered many actresses to play the part of Ethel Mertz, until one day Desi heard of an amazing Broadway actress named Vivian Vance. Lucille and Vivian were extremely compatible, and it almost felt like it was kismet when they found each other. Vivian and Bill did not get along at all in real life. In fact, they basically hated each other. But this worked out in favor for the show because it put a realness into their arguments. But they hated each other. The writers wanted the Mertzes to sing and dance, and by a stroke of good luck, William and Vivian were both singers and dancers. Lucy and Desi okayed every single pillow, picture, pot, and pan that went into the Ricardo's apartment. They wanted to make sure that it gave an authentic middle-class feel. During the filming of season 1, Lucy and Desi were also building their nursery in anticipation of birth of their first baby. The baby was due in June, but June came and went, and still no baby. Lucy remained pregnant more than halfway into July. God. When doctors finally decided to perform a C-section. And Lucy Desiree Arnaz was born on July 17th, 1951, weighing 7 pounds, 8 ounces. The next day, the proud new father handed out cigars to everyone at the studio, including the audience, and sang a song called There's a Brand New Baby in Our House that was written by Eddie Maxwell in her honor. Lucy had to go right back to work after the birth of her baby, missing hours and hours and hours of her early life. And once baby Lucy stopped sleeping through the majority of the day, it became even more difficult. I mean, if you've ever been a mother that has had to leave her baby to go back to work, it is the worst thing in the entire world. Oh my God. I cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. It was torture. During the early years of I Love Lucy, they were rarely home before midnight and they only had Sundays off. But by their 20th show, they were the #1 show for 3 years. I Love Lucy has been called the most popular show of all time, and such a natural devotion to one show can never happen again. I mean, truth. True. In May of 1952, Lucy and Desi walked into Jeff Oppenheimer's office elated. They told him that they just got word from their doctor that they were going to have another baby in January and they needed to cancel everything moving forward. Okay. So he sits staring at them for a moment, and then he suggests that they continue doing the show and have the baby on TV. Okay. This right here, this tells you how legendary this show was. Okay. What do I mean, right? At this time, it was extremely frowned upon to discuss pregnancy on television. In fact, they were not even allowed to say the word pregnant, only allowed to use the word expecting. So the fact that this was suggested means that Jeff Oppenheimer knew that this was TV gold and he had to keep them on the air. Desi's face lit up as he asked, "Do you think that we could? Would that be in poor taste?" They called CBS, got the green light, and with that, I Love Lucy continued. The baby was scheduled to be born by C-section on January 19th, which gave them a definite date to work around. They took a 2-week vacation, and then they began filming 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, starting in June. By October, Lucy began getting pretty big, and this is when they began filming 7 episodes that focused on Lucy's pregnancy. The episodes were screened by a priest, a minister, and a rabbi for any possible violations of good taste. That's what a big deal this was. Like the things that are on TV now, like, can you imagine? That's what a big deal this was. The priest, the minister, and the rabbi actually protested against CBS for not letting them use the word pregnant, wondering what was wrong with the word. I'm wondering that also. arguing that Lucy and Desi were showing a happy, normal family event. True. In real life, Lucy and Desi separated and rekindled many times, and the public knew this. Lucy and Ricky fight, and Ricky moves out of the apartment. To the writer's amazement, the audience members start weeping. A few moments later, when Lucy and Ricky reconcile on what was supposed to be a funny scene, nobody in the audience laughed. They were just all relieved that Lucy and Ricky reconciled. Both times Lucy was pregnant, she would moon over Desi's baby pictures, hoping that the baby would look just like him. While pregnant with her second baby in an I Love Lucy episode, Lucy sends an anonymous note during Ricky's show at the nightclub. While in the audience, she requests that he sings "We're Having a Baby, My Baby and Me" as a way to tell her husband that they were going to have a baby. So Ricky goes from table to table singing "Rockabye Baby." When he gets to Lucy's table, Lucy shakes her head yes, and Ricky realizes that he is indeed the father. Lucy would later share that while filming this scene, Desi got a flood of emotions, reliving the past 10 childless years before he found out that he was going to have baby Lucy. He got so emotional that he couldn't finish the song, and they both began to cry. Even the hardened camera guys got teary-eyed. The director wanted a redo, but the audience stood up and they said no. Lucy stopped doing shows in November of 1952 while she waited for Desi Jr. to be born. The baby's birth was scheduled for Monday, January 19th, 1953 at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, which is now Cedars-Sinai. So I don't know. They tried to keep it a secret, but the news leaked the story as they often do. When Lucy arrived at the hospital on Sunday, January 18th, to prepare for the baby, bouquets of flowers filled her room and half the corridor. The hospital gave Lucy pills to take the edge off and to help her sleep, but she laid awake all night praying, as any mother would, for a safe delivery and a healthy baby. That's expected. Okay, Lucy was conscious for the entire operation, and I know that it's typical with C-sections these days, but I do believe that there was a time where the mother would be put to sleep for the operation, and then when she woke up, she would meet her baby. Desi Arnaz Jr. was born on January 19th, 1953 at 8:20 in the morning. Desi was over the moon at the fact that he had a son to carry on the family name. That afternoon, Lucy woke up from a nap and found Desi sitting on her bed sobbing. There were 7,000 letters and 1,000 telegrams waiting for her, but this was just the beginning. The amount of telegrams, letters, cards, phone calls, gifts, and baby booties were upwards of 1 million. The same day Desi Jr. was born, 44 million Americans watched the arrival of little Ricky on the I Love Lucy show. The next day, Eisenhower was inaugurated as president, and the following Sunday, Walter Winchester set on air. This was a banner week. The nation got a man, and Lucy got a boy. In February, they won 2 Emmy Awards, Best Comic Actress and Best Comedy Show. That same week, Desi clinched an $8 million deal with Philip Morris, making them TV's highest paid stars. Okay, guys, if you're still here, thank you. I'm just going to stop this now because this is really, really long, but there is definitely going to be a part 2. So please look out for it. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you haven't yet. It only takes a couple seconds. It really helped me out. I really, really appreciate it. Until